let's get into safeties, Kevin, because this has been a long time coming. It's been a long time coming to talk about the safety position. We talked about the other positions. This one, I do kind of want to sprinkle in like parts of it. I think maybe relevant to talk a little about the corners as well, because you're talking about the entire secondary in totality, but specifically at the safety position. I wanted to start here, so I'll throw it to you, Kevin, here in a second. But just to give a quick breakdown of what KU is working with at the safety position, I broke down to 3 categories: departures, additions, returnees. Departures: OJ Burrows, Marvin Grant, and Caleb Purdy. Additions: Lyric Rawls and Laquan Robinson. And your returnees: the Dye brothers, Devin Dye, Jalen Dye, Damani Maxon, Mason Ellis, and Taylor Davis. So that's what the room is kind of looking like right now at the top of it, essentially. So as I throw it to you, what is your assessment of this safety room? When you consider the fact that you're losing 2 guys that took a majority of the snaps from last year, but you have some young guys stepping in as well. You brought in a couple transfers. Where do you think the safeties sit as we have left spring in the rearview mirror a while ago, but now heading into fall camp?
It's a giant question mark, right? And I'm not saying, hey, they're going to be bad. I'm saying it's a question mark. It's one of those where you're looking at it, and I think you can look at it and sort of see the vision, right, Nick, where you can see the group coming together in a certain way. When you're talking about Taylor Davis, who I thought acquitted himself really well for the tough situation that he found himself in a year ago, where you had injuries, you had all these different things. All of a sudden you're being called on in a situation where you didn't necessarily know that you were going to play that much. And he kind of got thrown into the fire, and he didn't burn. He did pretty well out there. And I thought last year was a pretty strong statement. But typically, Nick, when we see this big growth from a player, it's in that second year of knowing, hey, I've been on the field before. Here's what I really need to work on. The lights aren't quite as bright for you because you've been out there before. The Dye brothers, I would caution anybody from really looking at those 2 last year and feeling like, hey, this is what these guys were, because of the injuries, the fact that they were banged up and everything. Both of those guys are going to be in the rotation. And so don't be surprised when they're playing a lot. And if they're able to stay healthy, I think that's obviously a really good thing, not just for depth, but they'll have a chance this fall to compete to play quite a bit. Mason Ellis is a guy that had played special teams, and we saw him, kind of out there a little more in the spring with the top guys, and his role has kind of grown. And talking to some of the safeties and some of the coaches in the room, he was somebody that always got called out as not just maybe the strongest safety in the room from a strength standpoint, but also maybe the fastest, Nick. This is a guy that helped earn his KU scholarship by running in the 4.4s at KU camp when he was a high schooler coming out of Mulvane. And so the idea of having him potentially in a 2 or 3 safety group and the versatility that he could add there. Another returning guy that I did want to mention, because the players talked about him a lot, is Landon Nelson. He, like Mason Ellis, somebody that's played a lot of special teams. He's an important leadership cog here. You hear when the players talk about him, they talk about him in a similar way to what we discussed a year ago, Nick, with Ben Easters, right? Ben Easters was a guy that you pretty much knew, hey, this guy probably isn't going to play a ton for Kansas, but the way he carried himself, the way that he worked, the way that he led, the players still talked about him like, hey, this is an impact guy in our program because of this. Landon Nelson, is in line to play more than Ben Easters did. Obviously, you only have one quarterback on the field at a time, barring some sort of trick play, which I'm sure.
Hey, I was about to say, don't give Jim Zabrowski any ideas.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure there's a multi-quarterback package that's going to be out there. But I will say, I think he's going to play more, but at the same time, don't sleep on the leadership element that he's able to bring in. And then you mentioned the newcomers. I'm not sure that you could have gotten a better fit for this group than Lyric Rawls, somebody that has already Big 12 proven. The only real thing there is, again, injury stuff where, you're wondering, hey, if this guy holds up over the course of a full season, he's probably a plus Big 12 player that you just kind of plug and play into your secondary. And Laquan Robinson is a guy that got a lot of shout outs from his teammates for being sort of an explosive guy and somebody that can join that group. And the reason we bring up all those guys, I hate to sleep on Damani Maxson. It's just there are so many guys there, and he's a redshirt freshman. I think he's going to continue to build his way into that group because he was somebody I really liked out of high school. But you have a lot of guys, Nick, who fit different things. They have different skill sets. Taylor Davis is way different than Lyric Rawls, and Lyric Rawls is way different than Devin Dye. And so I think a lot of it is going to depend on kind of mixing and matching these guys, not just to see, hey, let's get the best safety on the field, but also whose skill sets fit together.
Yeah. And you mentioned Lyric Rawls. I agree with you 100%. That's a guy that I think was pretty much the perfect fit for what Kansas needed.
Yeah.
When you consider losing both Marvin Grant and OJ Burroughs, and I think Lyric Rawls is more of a Marvin Grant type of safety in how he plays. And he was a guy that was a starter on an Oklahoma State team that went to the Big 12 championship game.
Yeah.
So there's no question that he is certainly qualified from an athletic standpoint to be a starter and be, as you said, a plus starter at the Big 12 level. So a fantastic addition. You mentioned Mason Ellis as well. Kevin, Mason Ellis, not just one of the fastest players in the safety room, maybe one of the fastest players on the whole team at this point.
Yeah, he can really run.
Yeah, his speed, I think, is incredibly underrated, and he's somebody that I think could see the field quite a bit more this season than what we've seen in the past season or two with him as well. So I think right now, if you were to ask for essentially a two deep at this point, I would say Lyric Rawls and Taylor Davis are probably your top two, right?
Yeah,
heading into this season. As you mentioned, they both have different skill sets. Rawls, I think, is very much more of a box safety type, whereas Davis can be more that rangy type of player. I mean, OJ Burroughs was a really, really fantastic safety for Kansas and did a lot of things really, really well and was very, very rangy and with his coverage ability. Brian Bullitt, I think mentioned a number of occasions that he thought OJ Burroughs was one of the best covered safeties he'd ever coached. So you're definitely going to miss something with that. But I think Davis is a solid replacement in that area with Lyric Rawls. And then I think beyond that, you look at the Dye brothers. I love that you pointed out both those guys were playing hurt pretty much the whole season. I think I'm not sure that either one of those guys had really a full game where they felt 100%. So you hope that that's not the case this year. You hope that those guys can stay healthier, and if so, I think they can have an impact as well. I mentioned Mason Ellis, who I think has a chance to get on the field more. So I think you're right, Kevin. This is a group that has a lot of different pieces that can do a lot of different things at a higher level, and it's just going to be a matter of putting it together and seeing how it can work. But for me, at least, I look at Lyric Rawls immediately and say, okay, that's a guy that needs to be on the field a significant majority of the time. I think based off of his Big 12 experience, based off of his leadership, he's a more veteran player and what he can bring. We talked to him. I think he seems like somebody that would be a great vocal guy in the room as well.
Yep.
And then I think with Taylor Davis, same deal. A guy that as you mentioned, took a huge step forward, and I think potentially could be taking another huge step forward this season. So to me, those are the two guys that have really separated themselves at the top, just from based off of what we saw in the spring and whatnot. But you're right. This is a group that's probably going to be rotating quite a bit of guys, I would have to imagine.
Yeah, and if you remember OJ Burroughs coming out of high school, he set the interceptions record at IMG Academy, which, is just a ridiculous thing. The one area where he did struggle with, and Borland also brought this up, was he wasn't a consistent tackler. And I think with Taylor Davis, you're kind of maybe getting a little bit more versatility there, and that you're not necessarily going to get him being the coverage guy that OJ Burroughs was, because he was terrific there. But you're also going to have somebody that's a lot more comfortable coming downhill and smacking a guy in the run game and really padding him up. And some of that is a difference in size, right? OJ was not a very big guy. He was a cornerback sized guy playing free safety. And so I do think that that's a part of it. I'm glad you brought up Mason Ellis, because I think Kansas is probably going to have some different packages of who sort of that third, if you want to call him a linebacker / nickel / whatever, Kansas calls him a Cinco. when he's more of a defensive back. They call him a hawk when he's a linebacker. In that spot, I think you have some real options in terms of what you can do. John Kamara is a terrific athlete at linebacker who could play out there. When it's going to be more of a third corner, it's probably going to be like Saeed Gibbs, the transfer that they got from Georgia Tech, who has all kinds of experience playing as a slot corner. And I think that when it's a safety, when they go with a third safety, that's where things kind of get interesting in this group, right? Because you have a guy like a Devin Dye that can be a little bit more of a center field type, and you can move it and match some guys out there. But I think, too, you could also put somebody like a Mason Ellis out there, and he's not a linebacker, but he is a little bit bigger safety that you could have in that slot. You could also put Lyric Rawls there, put a different kind of guy next to Taylor Davis. And so I do think there's some really fascinating sort of mix and match with these guys. And I like that they've continued to build on that, Nick, with what they've done in recruiting, not just the guys who are coming in as freshmen. You have Brandon Schmelsley, who was a terrific ball player at the 8-man level at Axtell. Darian Jones coming in as well as more of that rangy, like 6'2", 180 pounds, arms to his knees type of guy. Schmelsley is a little bit thicker, has some great ball skills. And then you look at what they've done in 2026, even where I'm pretty sure Kansas will probably give J.J. Dunnigan a run at corner. But ultimately, Nick, I think he's a matchup safety. He's a guy that you can ask to do any one of about 80 billion different things at that safety position. And so in addition to this group, I like the way that they've continued to sort of build out with that safety group and continue to get different body types, different skill sets to where they can have that kind of versatility on the back end.
Well, and when you talk about mixing and matching, I think that kind of ties into really the only question mark remaining about this group, or the biggest maybe final missing piece of the puzzle, which is we don't know exactly even now what type of defense KU's going to be operating with DK McDonald, right? KU's played it pretty close to the vest in terms of what kind of scheme they might be trying to run. So as you kind of alluded to, like, it's very possible that maybe DK McDonald wants to use more of a 3 safety look, in which case that changes maybe sort of the equation on who's on the field.
He's been places where they have, like Iowa State. And so like, it's funny because Kansas was very coy this spring about what they were going to do defensively. And that includes DJ McDonald being very coy about what they were going to do, where he says, well, I've got some experience with 4 down fronts, with 3 down fronts, with 2 safeties, with 3 safeties. And so, Kansas is probably going to have to put a lot of that package out against Fresno State, because Fresno State is not an auto win. It's going to be a game that Kansas is going to have to play well in. And that may really be our first indication, Nick, is that first game of kind of what we're going to see a little bit more of this year.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, it may very well be that first game in which we do get the answer to that question, right? Like, yeah. I'm not sure, based off of what we heard in the spring, that there's going to be any additional info given in fall camp about exactly what scheme that KU is going to run defensively. And again, that as it pertains to the safety room, that could really shake up the matchups. That could really shake up how you deploy that group in terms of who's on the field more versus what position, and so on and so forth. So. Yeah, it's kind of an open-ended question, I think, at this point that unfortunately may not get answered from the outside perspective until we get to watch them in a game.
I almost guarantee, Nick, that even that first week when we get that first depth chart, that the depth chart will not reveal anything either.
That's very possible.